Anything weird happened in you guys' world? Anything weird happened in the world this week?
Yeah, what happened
last night?
Oh, dude.
All right, I have a story for you.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
I love stories.
Let's have
Please
it.
let Joe be in it, please.
So, Joe was not in it, although his response was, he responded to it. So I go to a restaurant, a little coffee shop in Redlands yesterday, and the guy was like, "What are you up to today?" And I was like, "Oh, I was just working, like no big deal." And he's like, "Oh, what do you do?" And he was like, and I was like, "Oh, I'm a pastor." And he's like, "A pastor?" I was like, "Yeah, a pastor."
Oh,
like,
no.
What is that? And I was like, "Oh, you know, like a minister or someone who works at a church." And he's like, "Oh, a pastor. I thought you meant like a passer." And I was like, "What's a passer?" And he was like, "I don't know, like a drug dealer or something." And I was like, "Well, I don't know. Maybe in a way, like, you know, drug dealing Jesus. I don't know. You could spin it that way if you wanted." And the guy in the line was like, "That's so true." And then I walked out being like, "Wow, did I really just say I drug deal Jesus?" And there's my story for you.
Hey, dude. Drug dealing Jesus.
I want to clarify.
Pusher.
I want to clarify that the mission statement of Paradox is not drug dealers for Jesus.
But you guys are pushing Jesus, but you're not drug dealers for Jesus. Hey.
Oh,
Welcome to Paradox.
That-
Sell Jesus on the corner.
Yes. Where we sling Jesus for you.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh,
This is going
mercy.
to a very strange place.
Well,
If
you
you
know
were
what,
looking
though?
for the crazy, there it is.
Hey, let me tell you though, you never know who that might reach. You know,
Hey.
True.
there are all kinds of there's all kinds
It
of
has some
ways that
parallel
people.
with the idea of the mustard seed and how controversial that was, or the Good Samaritan being a hero of the story. You know what I mean? I think Jesus was pretty controversial. So you guys are right in there. Go ahead and slang some Jesus, people.
Slaying some Jesus.
Slang some Jesus.
Yes, I've got my hands up over here. You know, this is the funny part of this is, you know, because we can't see each other right now, but I've just been, you know, through observing the other videos, I just imagine Craig right now just trying to like think, am I gonna laugh at this or am I just gonna like give that smile and just wait for it to pass until we get to the next thing?
This is unfair. It's like you can see me. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking I look like. And I'm like, oh no, now I'm being called out.
No, that's good. That means you're thoughtful. That means people can trust you because you don't just willy-nilly throw yourself at the whims of things like, you know, that other guy over there, Icky Timey.
Hey. I will say this episode's worth watching just to look for that.
Just to see if to look for him or for you.
Both, I guess.
Both, yeah. The thoughtlessness of Timey and the compensation of that in Craig. Yes, we'll find that. This is good. Nice awkward silence there. Beautiful way to get things going and rolling here. Oh man. Okay. Well, I think we've got stuff to draw from there. I'll find something to be weird in that. Welcome to the Urban Prophets Podcast. We are back at it again, man. It has just been a blessing. Today is kind of bittersweet. More sweet than bitter. But it is bittersweet because it is the concluding episode of our 3-episode arc, Making a Statement.
It's been riveting.
With Paradox Church, man. This has been this has been and is still a time of education and catch up, because some of us in the Christian world are very behind on thinking about these things. We're shackled and we need to be freed, or at least see the possibility of freedom. And we are very happy to have our sister Manders, as I call her. Her real name is Mandy, Pastor Mandy, and our brother Craig, Pastor Craig, who are the pastors of the Paradoxredlands Church in Redlands, California. You can find them online at paradoxredlands.com, or they're also on Facebook, and they got a podcast. So all this wisdom that you're seeing in these 3 episodes Yeah, there's more. There's like a whole well of things
Oh man,
where you
and
can
it's
do
been
that.
good. It's been really good.
Oh, it's been good. And they are a church, just in case this is the first time anybody's ever hearing about them. They are a church with one core belief, 2 commandments, and 3 practices. If you want to know about that, go back to episode 11 of this podcast where Craig so graciously broke that down for us. And we've been doing these statements, man. They have great, awesome, life-giving statements that they've done. LGBTQIA affirmation was our first one. The second one we talked about was celebration and affirmation of women.
Ladies.
Yes, and we are working on making sure that continues to happen, not just in token spaces, because and I got this a little bit of background,
Absolutely.
right? Because reason we had Pastor Mandy last week is because we were talking about women. And then we thought, now, are we going to do this like a youth day thing? Like you have the youth up there for the youth Sabbath, and then they just kind of go back into non-existence, right?
Put them in their corner, yeah.
No. She's a pastor of the church, and she should be part of these conversations as well. And so she is back again to bless us with those mandiferous jewels as we as we continue our talk today on anti-racism. This is the third statement.
Don D's.
Yes, sir.
Just before we get into that, can I just give a quick shout out?
Dude, shout him out.
I know we usually every so often just shout out to our listeners and our peeps. Thanks for listening along. I also want to shout out my guy Don D's.
Hey.
Who was featured in the Chosen Sheep.
Shoot.
It was a podcast.
It's a blog.
It's a blog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
my
dang.
dude, man, congratulations. It was a fantastic article. You absolutely deserve it. Keep up the good work.
Okay.
And thank you, listeners, for following along. And thanks, Don, for you're the heart and the brain and the power and the finance, basically everything.
And the finance.
So,
oh, Lord have mercy.
the rest of us
y'all
are just
can help
hanging
us
out
with
with you. For
No, but this is great.
Yeah,
hey,
man,
actually,
good work.
Dude, shout out to his Chosen Sheep. This Friday at 1. Oh, let's see. By the time you hear this may have actually already happened. But when we're filming this, it's Wednesday. So this coming Friday at 1:00, I'll be doing an IG Live with them, and we're talking about creativity and ministry. So if you happen to be available, then jump in and join on that. So good. We're just trying to, in all our various ways, we're just reaching out, slinging the gospel, as Pastor Mandy.
I like that.
As Pastor
Slanging
Mandy, alluded to a little bit earlier in the
Very nice.
drug dealers for Jesus. So we'll maybe invite them back and we'll talk about what that looks like. But today we're talking about anti-racism. I had a question too to start off, you guys, Mandy and Craig. Were these 3 statements that you had, were they on your heart to do and that's why you did them? Or is this becoming a practice of the church where you will find something to reflect on and make a statement about? And
that's a great question.
Go ahead, Craig. You can start this one. Yeah, go ahead.
That's a great question. The LGBTQIA grew out of a need, and that need was to address the fact that we had couples in the church that we felt were on the track to on the fast track to marriage.
Okay.
And so we tried to anticipate that and recognize that as a need. And so we did that statement, and there was this moment in the church where we realized that there was something more than the need that was being met, that these were words that needed to be said beyond that. And so then we went back to the elders and started talking to them about what other statements we needed to be. And right away, the elders said, we've got to do a statement of women's celebration and empowerment. And then they also said, at that time, they said diversity.
Gotcha.
That would later change to anti-racism for very specific reasons. But it was told to be a diversity statement. We talked about last week why we chose the women's statement first. And then that led to the anti-racism statement being this year's statement here in 2020.
Okay. Do you foresee other statements coming, or is it kind of like as the Spirit leads, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it?
Yeah, we've talked about a couple of them. We usually start to talk about the next one sometime around January. There's a couple that are on the table. The two that seem to be the most popular and the ones that the elders are expressing the most thought toward right now are a statement of mental health and mental awareness. The other one is one for the environment and care for creation. So it may be one of those. It may be something else. When we debrief after a statement's made, we kind of have some ideas thrown around. But usually in January is when we pick what the next one will be to work toward unveiling it sometime in the summer.
Okay, cool. Mandy, have you been a part of that process yet, or have all of these statements been prior to your? Have the committees and formulations been prior to your arrival?
So this committee was, I believe, formed, was beginning to be formed and talked about when I came on staff. And because I am not a person of color, I was not on the committee. But I was in conversation with a number of the elders and things like that as this was going on. But my role was in the creation of the statement was like next to nothing. They did a phenomenal job on this.
No, that's awesome. Okay, well,
Nice.
Without further ado, because I got questions. This is a beefy statement, y'all. It's beefy. I went and watched the video this time too. So I love that, that video that you guys put together. I like that you have that visual resource for everybody on your website too, so they can kind of, see, because that was kind of my first insight into your congregation. If I had never known about Paradox Church, that video was pretty much an advertisement for, what is this congregation made of? So I liked it. Can we have, who's reading the statement for us today?
That's me. I'm happy to read it.
Okay.
And yes, it is quite a bit longer. And the reason for that is when we commissioned this committee, they came back and they said, we don't think we can keep this to a similar length because there's so many more aspects that go into this that we feel like that we need to address.
Yeah.
And so they were conscious of trying to match the other length, and they just didn't feel like they could say the things that need to be said without making it a little longer. So
Gotcha.
When we read this one, it does take a little bit more time to read, but I think that the words are really worth reflecting on because they are very, very carefully chosen by the subcommittee that put this together that was later approved by the elder board of the church.
Okay.
So I'll dive into it here. We read,
Right.
As the elders of Paradox, we are charged to cultivate the spiritual life of our church. This responsibility compels us to make a statement of full celebration and affirmation for people of all races, cultures, and ethnicities. We commit to building an anti-racist culture in our leadership and congregation as we work to dismantle white supremacy. We came to this conclusion through more than 4 years of extended study of the Holy Bible, sustained prayer in search of God's guidance, and deepening in our personal relationships within our church body. Therefore, may everyone who comes into contact with us and who connects with us at Paradox know that we believe that every person from every culture and every ethnicity is lovingly crafted in the image of God. Every person's culture, race, and ethnicity is a unique and irreplaceable testament to the divine. We recognize that much of Western Christianity has historically perpetuated white supremacy, profiting from colonialism and genocide on stolen land. Therefore, we will teach the history of Western Christianity's racism in its most honest terms so that we avoid the temptation of allowing our religion to be co-opted by the sin of white supremacy. By learning to recognize racism in our history, we will become better at recognizing racism today and work boldly against it as we follow Jesus Christ. We refuse to practice coded racism by dismissing or criticizing those of other belief systems whose religious and cultural practices are not held by the majority of the membership of Paradox. We acknowledge that Christianity has practiced racial discrimination and genocide under the guise of religious righteousness, and we reject that practice. We prioritize human rights as a sacred endeavor. We are called to be part of our local community and to stand with those among us who are suffering due to racism. This includes police brutality, racial profiling, family separations at the border, undocumented immigrant injustice, and other human rights issues. We recognize that racism in the Christian faith includes a long history of sending missionaries to proselytize and indoctrinate people of various cultures all over the world, with little respect to the beliefs and customs already present in those communities. Paradox rejects this form of mission and will never participate in it because we recognize the harm that this creates. We value and respect cultures different from those found within our church. We understand that when part of the majority group, we need to be careful not to erase other cultures. When speaking about race and culture, we will use language to reflect that we are one and not us versus them. We will not tolerate racist language, actions, or racial abuses, commonly referred to as microaggressions. We appreciate that naming this behavior when it happens is an important step in building an anti-racist culture. We build environments for genuine listening that center the experience of marginalized groups. We invite folks to engage in personal growth, understanding that members are at various stages of incorporating anti-racism in their lives. We commit to structuring worship services that are culturally inclusive and celebratory, which consists of an intentional approach to incorporating diverse representation through all music and art forms in our services, while honoring creativity in its native tongue. We encourage church leadership to reflect the diversity of our church congregation and ordain pastors in full appreciation of who they are without expectation for assimilation. We embolden our staff to preach against racism with awareness of their social location. When considering guest speakers and podcast guests, our staff will invite guests who can speak to perspectives that are different from their own. We craft sermons with a deepened understanding of how different cultures interpret the Bible as we decolonize the teachings and messages of Scripture. We will present a variety of perspectives, including liberation and womanist theology. We dedicate ourselves to teaching our children and young persons the sacred work of anti-racism. This includes building and providing resources for parenting strategies to use at home, creating programming for youth that is inclusive and celebrates diversity, and discussing the history of racism and its effects today. We create and provide educational resources and programming on anti-racism with topics including racism versus prejudice, intersectionality, colorism, historical factors, impacting modern politics and society, and action steps to combat racism at a personal and systemic level. We acknowledge the physical and emotional stress experienced by victims and witnesses of racial acts. We will engage in communal practices, including meditation and other spiritual exercises, to help our bodies heal from the effects of racism. We say and we commit to all of these things in order to bring glory and honor to God, to see and embrace Jesus Christ in all. Sincerely, the elders of Paradox Church.
Amen. I almost want to say, man, it's you know, I always have two things working on me, like when these things are going on, because like I said, I feel like the solemn words. It's like being in front of the burning bush when you're getting the directives from God, you know, and it's like very solemn, where I almost want to feel like I want to close my eyes, like it's a prayer time, and I mean, because these are kind of prayers, I also had to curb my black church reactions, where I want to be like, say that again. Amen to that. You know, because I want to, you know, make sure everybody's focusing in on that. But, you know, I've, you know, read this like about 3 or 4 times now, so I know where I want my interjections. But, yeah, we can't be selfish like that. Can't be selfish. But we've got to gotta move forward. This is great, man. When that statement was released, what was the feeling at church? Mandy, maybe you could take this one, or what you observed.
Yeah. You know, this was in the midst of just everything that we've been facing with racial injustices towards George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and all of the protests that have been happening all summer long. And so there was, I can speak mostly from the parents' perspectives and the youth perspective. There was just almost a celebration and also like a finally. There was a weird kind of combination of those happening. This finally, there's a church out there who's willing to step outside of religiosity, to step outside of church structure and to name these things. Which is for many of our members, I think, is something that's very tied to their faith. These acts of protest, these acts of being and being on a journey to overcome racism and to become anti-racist is something that's very near and dear to many of our church members' hearts. We had the Black Lives Matter protest that happened in Redlands, organized by Black Lives Matter, protest that happened in Redlands pretty early on, and it was awesome. You showed up there, and all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, there's one church member. Here's another, and here's another, and this has been something that has been, I feel our church has been crying out for. And so when this happened, and here is our community declaring this, knowing we're not here yet, but we're going to work towards it, and knowing that our elders and this committee is going to hold us accountable was just, I think it was almost the first sign of hope for a while for many of them. I don't know, Craig, you want to add to that?
Yeah, unfortunately, coronavirus has really taken away a lot from a lot of people, whether it's tragically losing loved ones to people, or it's like the fact that my daughter is currently going through homeschool and she doesn't have the opportunity to be with her friends at school. We've all lost something. And one thing that I think our church body lost was the ability to read this statement in person together. And so you said earlier something about being bittersweet. It was amazing how much we could like feel the community through remote church while this statement was being read.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like it just felt like there was like this real sadness that came with it too. Mandy talked a lot about the happiness from the statement, but there's also this sadness because we were all apart. And when I look back at the best days of Paradox, it's almost always when we unveil these statements. I think that when I think about how this landed with the church, I think that people really felt that this was a statement that wasn't compromised. There was this real sense that people of color wrote this statement and guided this process, which, I think a lot of people were really happy to see. There was a big question as to whether or not the white members of the church and the white pastoral staff was outsourcing this to people of color and whether we take it seriously. That's something that we're still trying to prove. That we don't prove it overnight, but we still try to prove, over the next years to come that we do take this seriously, and it's not just a statement that we can show and be like, "Hey, check out our church and what we feel." It's got to translate into action. Nice. So it's been a really good thing. We've spoken out pretty heavily against white supremacy since this statement came forward. We were doing it before, but now after the statement, what's really changed in the tenor of the church is that people know that we're not debating or being kind to the concept of white supremacy. And it's this moment where we drew a line in the sand and said, we will condemn this sin here. And we will continue to condemn this sin. And I have to tell you, this has been a journey for me personally. I grew up in privilege. I grew up being very blind to the injustices, specifically around race in this country. And this church has helped me to see how I've been complicit in that. And I've learned as a white pastor that I can always go back and speak about how the church will deceive and lie to its white members in order for them not to see white supremacy. And that's something I can always speak out against as a white pastor. And so if there's any white pastors listening to this and you're not sure where to start in the whole conversation about anti-racism, it always starts with white people talking about the sin of white supremacy and moving forward. And a statement saying that this church is against white supremacy is a great place to start with that.
Craig, this statement came out, it was birthed and it came out officially after the coronavirus? isolated
Yes,
us?
it did.
So
Yeah.
you guys haven't had the actual opportunity to read it together as one communal body?
Not in person.
Okay, yeah, that helped me. That helps me listen to that timeline. Mandy, were you? Did you also come from a family that was privileged, and you weren't? You were blindsided by the idea of privilege.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very similar story to Craig in that regards. And, I look back and I have I think very tragic and very horrifying memories of me being the person in the class who was like, slavery happened 400 years ago. Why are we still talking about this? Like, this isn't an issue anymore. And it's been quite a journey for me. I had one of my close friends tell me, man, this chapter of Mandy it's just, I would have never guessed you would have ever been able to end here. And that's in large part due to a number of my friends who have held me accountable, who have said things and called me out. Like, that's a racist idea, or that's highly inappropriate. The privilege one I actually noticed the idea of privilege in probably maybe like 6 or 7 years ago for the first time. I was talking to a few colleagues, and they were talking and celebrating about women pastors, but they were specifically celebrating brown and black women pastors. And I remember being kind of uncomfortable with that. Like, I'm a woman too. I'm struggling in a church that doesn't celebrate women too. Why race me, And they were very kind and way more generous than I deserved, for them to be like, yeah, check yourself, here's what's going on. And yeah, you have women against you, but you don't have your skin color against you. You don't have your culture against you. Like, take what you have and then triple it, and quadruple it, and that's what we have. And I will forever be grateful for that conversation, because that set me on a road where I really had to confront myself. I had to confront my upbringing. I had to really put in perspective my experience in relation to many of my friends and many of my colleagues, and many of the other people out in the world who I don't even know, who just are simply a different color than I am. And so, yeah, I agree very much and relate very much with what Craig said.
Ooh, what a difficult task, huh?
Yeah. Facing yourself should never be easy.
Yeah.
Everything is worth it is a challenge, man. That's good. That's kind of part of why it's worth it. I mean, man, I don't imagine that we'll eliminate any of the issues that we have probably in our I almost don't think it will happen in our lifetime. Maybe not in Earth's history, but the thought of there being a day where this is not an issue, man, that almost blows my mind. That's almost like one of those when did God begin kind of thoughts, When I don't even know if I can imagine it, but the journey and the progress of it, yeah, it's good. It's good to see at least people that are growing and changing, even if overall society kind of isn't, but
See, and Donovan, that's so much of our work is like being able to help white people see that white supremacy isn't going away in our lifetimes. And you think about one of the greatest temptations I face as a white person is to believe in the superiority of my own skin. And how church refuses to talk to me about that temptation. That's a reason why we're in so much of a world of hurt with white supremacy and how it's crippling the nation right now. This is something that the church should be at the forefront of, stepping up and telling white congregants, like, you will be tempted to believe in your superiority all the time in this country. Everything is built for you not to think about your race, to pretend that you don't see any of this stuff. You need to become aware of it, because it's not going away. It is deeply entrenched in our religion, in our society, and in our country. And if we can become aware of it and give people, specifically white members, the ability to see how this is affecting and causing pain, then we are ultimately helping them to avoid the sin of white supremacy rather than being complicit in it.
Yeah.
Man.
And I think it's very permission giving when white members see their pastors doing the same towards themselves. I think it's an important thing. If they don't see their white pastors doing it, then why should they do it?
Man, let me say something
tell
on
you
that.
what. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, you go first.
No, I was just gonna say, not just for your white members, but for your minority, your colored members, it brings us a sense of hope as well. It's deeply securing to hear a white person stand beside you and say, yeah, I realize we are a big part of this problem, and it helps us feel like, okay, we become validated. And it's less scary in the world. So that's for sure.
Yeah, because there's nothing worse than having, I don't know if I've told this. I did tell this story. This was like an episode way back, like our maybe a second or third episode was FYI, I'm a blackity black man, and and I told this story about how I had some friends. These were my dudes. But when they got drunk and they kind of got loose, the stuff that came out of their mouth, I was like, whoa. And we're friends. And to hear that from somebody, hear these derogatory terms from people that you consider to be your friends, yeah, that's really shattering. And when you, I've been in a church where, I've heard a pastor say something like, I'm going on vacation, and I wouldn't want to go somewhere like Chicago. That's like, who would want to go there? To go to the inner city. I'd rather go to somewhere like Scotland. And you hear that, and you're like, okay. I guess maybe Scotland's got some nice things, but that's definitely not the first thing that goes into your mind. And this is a person that is your pastor, and you're kind of like thinking about it, and you're like, I know that they don't even understand the implications of that statement, but I wonder how they would feel if we were to even bring that up to them. If they would be like, no, come on, that's ridiculous. Or would they be like, my bad, I'm sorry, I didn't even think of it that way, And that's part of the issue, right? So I want to get into some of these questions, and one of the first ones, since we're on this topic, you talked about teaching the history of Western Christianity's racism in its most honest terms. You kind of talked about why it was important to say that, so I want to jump to, how are you planning to do that, and do you anticipate any pushback as you embark on these endeavors? And either one can go first, yeah.
Yeah, this is something that I am disappointed in my education for teaching me so very late in life. The fact is, all of this institution in America that was racially motivated chattel slavery, selling and purchasing, owning and enslaving men and women who had black bodies. All of it was enabled by the Christian church in America. Oof. And you have to see how it actually enabled it and allowed people to feel okay about this horrific sin. I mean, you have white Christians who would beat their slaves 6 days a week, go to church on Sunday, sit in a pew, and the pastor would tell them that this was all part of God's hierarchy. They would then cite stories like Noah and the cursing of his son Ham, which is a very, very racist interpretation of that story. Basically, white supremacists came along and read into the text that Ham had dark skin, and because Noah cursed him, they were cursed for all time and therefore inferior. This is the driving theological force that God basically created different races to be subservient to each other. And then when abolitionists come along and they started getting hold in the church, it took a while, it took a very long time, but when you read the debates that happened, the theological debates, you read words like abolitionists torture the scriptures to get it to say whatever they want. And it goes on, and there's all sorts of theological debates that occurred after this. There's a great book by a man named Mark Knoll, who wrote The Civil War as Theological Crisis, where he just records sermons leading up to the Civil War and how people responded to each other from pulpits, obviously in white churches, because there weren't a lot of black churches back then, of course. And what's really tragic in all of this, on top of the just immeasurable tragedy of slavery, is that I sat through classes in religious education, and no one ever told me, you want to know what the biggest mistake in the church's history, Craig, is that we thought that slavery was okay. Let me give you the tools to see how we were blinded to this sin and allowed it to happen so nothing like this ever happens again. And I mean, this is mind-boggling when you think about this. And I get pretty fired up about this because it's almost like people don't want to admit it happened. And even then, like, so much of the way that we remember the Civil War is all about protecting the white dignity of Southerners, which is even more grossly offensive. And I think that we've got to really think as a church, look back at our history and be willing to commit to the fact that this event, this sin of slavery occurred and was enabled by people's interpretation of Scripture. And we've got to commit to making sure that that never happens again. And I'm speaking specifically to white pastors right now. And if you have no clue of this, another book you can recommend, I highly recommend, is Javar Tisby's The Color of Compromise. Fantastic book on the church's history in America that talked about how it enabled not just racially motivated chattel slavery, but then segregation and all the things that followed after that. We need to be aware of how we fell to this temptation so we can avoid it in the future.
Wow.
At very least, to combat it in the present. Because
I'll be right back, you guys.
that in the history of humanity, humanity's always had a divot, and that is we are broken, and we are often looking for the class that is more privileged or that's more empowered, and so that's tricky. Mandy, I wanted to ask you, because we're so steeped in a history that involves racism and classism, and there's always this struggle between the privileged group versus those that are marginalized. How do you, in your church, and I noticed it was one of you, it was a portion of the statement, which is actually well written. This is a great statement, guys. It's super robust, actually. I was almost overwhelmed by just taking it in because it's so intricate. How do you allow for the expression of worship that speaks to people of color or the more marginalized group? And I ask this because our worship today, mainstream Christian worship, tends to either sound, it tends to be very contemporary music or high church, which both are forms of Anglo worship, right? So how do you guys, in your worship, and I know you guys haven't actually met together since COVID and since the statement, but how have you guys talked about the expression of your worship and letting that be represented more broadly?
You know, a lot of it is allowing each worship leader to pick songs that they're really feeling each week. We were actually just talking about this yesterday, and we get a diverse set of songs when we do this. And so, each worship leader has their own style and their own sorts of music that they like. And it creates, I think, a very beautiful worship experience. Some days we have one worship leader who kind of tends towards the Gospels. Others, we might get more of a brilliance Gungor kind of vibe. I myself am a common hymnal. If you haven't heard of common hymnal, poor Craig, that's like all I've been talking about for like 6 months.
It's a true story.
It's a true story. Common hymnal is my jam. I love common hymnal so much. They're so good. They basically write worship music for those who feel outcasted from the church. And so they have incredible songs right now that are just laments of so much of the racial injustices that are going on. Sorry, did not mean to go on a diatribe on
No, this is good.
We need that info.
It's so good. To me, it's the forefront of content for worship music right now. And so there's that. But then we're also, we did this once and are trying to look for ways to do this. This is, I think it can be a growth area for us, where we're not only singing English songs, but we're also encompassing other languages. We had, on our anti-racism Sabbath, it was just so good. One of our praise leaders sang a song. Do you remember what song it was? I'm mind blanking on the name of it.
Yeah, it was Oh Dreamer.
Oh Dreamer by Brilliance.
Of course.
Right?
Yep.
Yes. Oh Dreamer by the Brilliance. And on one of the choruses and verses, another worship leader came in and sang it in Spanish. It was just a very beautiful moment. And so this is something that I think we are growing in. Well, also it's kind of an adventure to kind of explore how to grow in this and how to not whitewash everything.
Yeah. It's tricky.
Yeah, and to jump on what Mandy said there, so much of it is just paying attention and thinking about, okay, is this inclusive and is this working toward what our statement says? And looking at the participants that are on stage, is this something that feels like it's got to fit into a format and we're asking people to adapt to a culture? Or is it something that encourages people to be who they are and express their own stories and their histories? And this statement is brand new. I mean, it's just over a month old, so we're still getting into it. Nice. That's a lot of what's driven us forward.
And Craig, I'm really curious about the makeup of the committee that did this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when it started, they were all people who were invited to participate in it. And the only rule was we wanted people of color that were on it. I think there was 12 people that were, there were 12 people that were on it. Wide representation from ethnicities and heritages all over the globe, as well as people who were immigrants, who immigrated here to America and they were the first generation. We've had people who are multi-generations within America. There's all sorts of experiences that came forward, and these people were selected by the church in order to represent as much of the diversity of people of color here at the church that we had. I think we would have opened it up a little bit more, like we did with the women's statement, if we were still meeting in person. But we felt like invites were the right way to go with all the madness of COVID and trying to figure out how to put this statement together. So I think it was about half women, half men, and just very, very many different cultures represented, and for people from all different walks of life.
Now, I want to jump on that with the other question, and I had to step out for a minute, so I don't know if you guys talked about this yet. But when you talk about the decolonizer, look, man, anything with the word colonizer, I'm like, yo, that's my jam right there. That's just the buzzword. So when you say decolonizing the teaching and message of Scripture, my question was, where do you begin with this? Do you have to be a theologian or a biblical expert to do this work? Or how does everybody participate in this practice? And I want to add on to that, because you're talking about the committee, because these things are so, like, the wording is, it's really, really greatly articulated, very eloquent and everything. And I'm wondering, the people that are on these committees, are they theologians? Are they wordsmiths? Are these a mix of people that are kind of doing everyday jobs and religion is not necessarily what's forefront in their mindset? How are all of those things coming together when you're trying to be diligent to and what's the word that I'm looking for? I have integrity with scripture and leading, theology and spiritual life, and how does all of that stuff converge? And I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on that.
Craig, I think you should go first on this.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the people behind it. They were all lay people. Nobody, I'm pretty sure, I'm going through everybody in my head, I don't think had any college degree or higher of religious education. Obviously, there's some people that were really well educated on the committee. So there's one MD. There's other people who have master's degrees. So a lot of people were really well educated, but nobody had a religious training or a religious degree in hand, I should say. The thing that helped a lot was that we had talked about race from the front several times before this. And it wasn't just me, whether it was guest speakers or people who came in. We felt like we were going to talk about, racism whenever the Bible talks about racism, which is quite a bit. And that started a lot of conversations about what a church should be. And so there were these ideas that were floating out there that this committee just really grabbed a hold of and started to put pen to paper. And, it's kind of interesting when you give it away. And you ask a committee to come back with something, and they come back. And I remember reading the first draft and just being like, oh my goodness, this is so much better than anything I expected, anticipated, anything I'd seen. And I was just elated at the quality of work because the people on the committee just gave themselves to this statement. And it was a lot of hours, it was a lot of time, but they were just had really strong wills and just really wanted to see this thing come into fruition. And they kept making it bolder and bolder, and it got more exciting to me. Which leads to your question about decolonizing. I've learned that when white pastors speak on race, they love to speak on behalf of people of color and very rarely want to speak on white supremacy. And that's something that's really important to bring forward, because when we pay attention to other to how white pastors should be going about this conversation, I really believe that we should be talking first and foremost about white supremacy. And the way that we understand that is you start to look through history and you realize how much the Bible and Christianity was intertwined with the Euro colonization of the world, and how it was used to justify grotesque evils against indigenous people here in the Americas, as well as Africans who were bought and sold. As well as you can go even as small as, I just read a story today about Sir Edmund Hillary, who was the first person to climb Mount Everest. He climbed it with a Nepalese Sherpa, a man named Tenzing Norgay. And when they got to the top of the mountain, Tenzing Norgay bowed in reverence before the mountain. And Sir Edmund Hillary, who was a white New Zealander, said, well, we finally knocked the bastard off. Which I think that perfectly encapsulates white colonizational attitude toward the world. So the word decolonizing is really important to include in a statement like this, because it recognizes the history of where we've come from and how Christianity has been weaponized to oppress people of color. And once we begin to understand that, speaking specifically to people who are white, we can work to undo that. And that's our role in this whole conversation, is how do we undo the horrors and the sins of white supremacy?
Yeah, so we're talking about the president and his opponent, Biden, and of course, Chris Wallace, who was the moderator at the time. The moderator, Chris, presented a question to Donald Trump where he said, do you denounce white supremacy? Which in the front end seems like just a clear cut, fairly easy for Christians, very morally clear yes or no kind of answer. Right. But after dancing around it and seeming to try to pull in distractions of quite possibly other people,
what about
he said a statement along the lines, huh?
I just said what about isms?
Yeah. And he says and I quote, this is not quite a quote, it's fairly close to it. Proud boys, stand back and stand by. Mandy, what do you think about that particular statement? What does that say about him? And what should the response for responsible Christians be?
Oh, man. Craig and I talked about the debate at length this morning. I was distraught. He was like, why are you distraught? Like, why are you surprised? And it's true.
Yeah, right.
There's literally no reason why I should be surprised. I'm just continually horrified when humans are just so inhumane. I think, and I don't know. It's the antithesis of what humanity is supposed to be. It's the antithesis of humanity, just in general, of what was displayed last night by Donald Trump. And I'm horrified. And I think if a Christian's, particularly a church's response is not to condemn that statement publicly and clearly this Saturday or Sunday, then they have failed as a community. And I will stand by that.
That's strong.
Hey, that's good. That's good. I'm going to make a statement. It's not a political statement. Donald Trump is a bad human being.
Yes.
This is not political.
To put it mildly.
Fact. Yeah.
Well, and if I could add to that, the overwhelming majority of Donald Trump's base is white Christians. And the fact that he can't denounce white supremacy because it would somehow undermine his popularity with white Christians is the problem that requires statements like this to be made. And if you go to a church with a white pastor, and that white pastor, as Mandy said, does not stand up at some point here in the recent memory or in the very near future, stand up and say that white supremacy is a sin and we condemn it, you are participating in a church that actually aids whites or is complicit with white supremacy. And I feel like I have to be this direct with the words because, we've made statements about women and we've made statements about homophobia. And I've found personally that racism and white supremacy is further entrenched in the church in America today than either of those issues of inequality that we're facing.
I agree.
It's been more inflammatory when I've brought it up, particularly from white Christians in our church and in previous churches I've worked at. It's more mercurial and harder to pin down. And I found that the only way to really address this and do this justice is to hit it head on and uncompromisingly say, white supremacy is a sin over and over again, because the church just has such a hard time saying it because they're worried they're going to lose their congregants if they do.
And I think what you were saying, Craig, about it being so entrenched, I think that speaks and is demonstrated in the fact that we weren't educated on this in any way, shape, or form. I can remember very clearly when all of this began, there was we were sitting on your porch lamenting the fact that, man, we have been thoroughly trained in the queer community in the Bible, women in the Bible, but we have not received any education on this. And I think that just speaks to how entrenched it truly, truly is.
Yeah.
Deeply entrenched. In fact, the teachings that we do have more subtle racism in it than anything else.
Yes, that's very true.
Or just outright racism. I mean, you mentioned the ham story. One of the organizations that I worked with for a couple of years, their president decided to speak about racial injustice. And I was curious. I was like, what is he going to say? And lo and behold, what does he pull out of his back pocket but the ham story and how it is representation of this curse that has plagued the Black community. And it was sickening. It was sickening. This is a president of a Christian organization that sends out students and families to places in the world to support them in their Christian growth. And it's like, you have no business doing that. if that is your understanding of Scripture.
Yeah, then we go out into the world, and basically the message we take is that you are heathens, your culture is heathenous, and to accept Jesus is to accept this Eurocentric religious practice. And anything besides that is quite evil. I mean, for the longest time in the 80s and 90s, the reasoning we had against any kind of music that wasn't a hymnal, that had too many beats, is because of the rhythm, and not necessarily even the words, but the rhythm makes you become it takes you into a trance, and its roots are in tribal African voodoo.
Yep.
And that was just a very, very popular statement. Things like that, and things like our little books that we have with our Uncle Arthur, and every character in the Bible in there is white with blonde hair. It's, it desensitizes us to the reality of this Middle Eastern group of human beings that were migrating, and that looked nothing like Adam, surfer dude, and Eve with the beautiful blonde hair.
Adam Surfer, dude.
Yeah.
But so that when we see the reality, we're kind of thrown back and grossed out by it. No, this is no ways.
And to bring it into
Jesus couldn't
pop
have had a big
culture,
nose.
I'm part of this group called the Black Christian Influencers, and it's a really awesome group. And you have a whole wide spectrum of Christian influencers. Usually they're either doctors or life coaches or in business, or big educators, all these different types of groups. And one of the interesting conversations that we had was where somebody put forth the idea of, I don't know if any of you have seen Beyonce's Black is King. And
so good.
Yeah, I loved it, right? And but there were some people that are like, man, I don't know. As Christians, should we be into that? Should we? I don't know. There's some weird kind of stuff in there that I don't know if that's Christian or not. And it's like, well, when you say, is that Christian?
Right.
Are you talking about a certain prepackaged or the Christianity that was sort of served to you on the on the platter? And if it's not in that, like, there's this scene at the beginning where the mothers are taking their babies and they're washing water over their heads, and they're saying, oh, this is a water ritual, and that's kind of like a weird thing. And it's like, have anybody ever heard of baptism?
Right.
And it's crazy because it's just like, from when you think about the source of where something comes from, then that has this coloring or this connotation that comes with it, where it becomes either sanctified or questionable, and things like that. And that's something that's coming from a group of Black Christian influencers, and that is how deeply this thing is in there, because a lot of that discussion, the pushback was, anytime anything comes from Africa, or if it comes from something tribal or cultural or rural, then it's automatically demonized or thought of as unsanitary and unvalued and things like that. So yeah, it's interesting to see really how deeply that's entrenched, even within some of the mindset of the people who are the cultures that are actually trying to get out of this framing.
I had a student once, when I was a religion teacher, and then he ended up being one of my husband Joe's students as well. And he would just have this word constantly whenever something in the Black community was brought up. He would point out to me or Joe and just be like, "Ooh, this is colonization showing up." And I just so appreciated, because I wasn't even aware of some of the things that he was pointing out. And I just appreciate that he was naming it.
Yeah, man.
Hey, you guys, so, Craig.
Yeah.
Your statement, rightly so, is called anti-racism statement.
Yep.
Suggesting there would be another way to say that. And I know that we have compared and contrasted not racist or non-racist versus anti-racist.
Mm-hmm.
Can you maybe tell us where the name of the statement came from, and if it had to do with that, and what's the difference, if so?
Yeah, so it originally started as a diversity statement, and as we were talking with the elders, we just hated that direction because it sounded like we were going to have a diversity Sabbath, and the diversity Sabbath would feature different instruments for one Sabbath a year, and it'd be like, look how diverse we
It's
are.
like
Yeah.
a
Wouldn't
month
really
or
have
something,
any
huh? Like a
consequence.
history month of some sort for a group.
Yeah,
of people.
exactly. It's like check out how
We've
we can
done
be
it.
diverse for one Sabbath, and then we can go back to our colonial ways, for the 51 Sabbaths for the rest of the year.
Mercy. Yeah.
So it just felt like wrong. And we knew it felt wrong. And it took us a little while before someone suggested we should call it the anti-racist statement. And I really like that. It was a bit contentious within the elder board because it was by far the most aggressive of the statements, or you could say it's kind of a negative statement as opposed to women's celebration affirmation, LGBTQIA celebration affirmation. We landed on that though after some discussion because it's so important for us to recognize that to be non-racist is to be complicit in racism. I remember I had this moment, and when I tell stories, you got to understand, I'm not proud of these stories, but this is where I've come from and, kind of what I've seen. I remember when Obama and Hillary Clinton were competing in the primaries in 2008. And I believe her name's Muriel Bowser, who is the elected representative from Washington, D.C., who doesn't get to vote, but she gets to sit in the House of Advisors House of Representatives as an advisor. And she was on Stephen Colbert's show, and Stephen Colbert asked her, hey, who are you voting for, Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama? After all, you got to choose between either, a black man or a white woman. And she responded that she was going to be voting for Barack Obama because she feels that she is more black than she is a woman.
Ooh.
And I remember hearing that in 2008 and thinking to myself, what? How is that possible? And later, looking back on it, I realized that the whole system is rigged for me to never have to think about my race ever in my lifetime. Whereas Muriel Bowser thinks about her race constantly. And she wasn't trying to deny her womanhood as much as, I've read subsequent interviews and other things that she's done. And she, the way this society's set up is one where she has to think about this frequently. And that was one of those moments where I all of a sudden thought, I just kind of started to realize how much I had missed the point. And later I met a teacher who Donovan views as a mentor also, Maury Jackson.
Oh, yes.
Who started walking me through, very kindly asked, so what authors are you reading? And then I told him, and he said, all those guys are white, Craig, there's a problem. And, I heard it, I was like,
That's
oh.
how he gets you every time.
Exactly. And even then, I asked Maury, for the majority of my pastoral career, I viewed topics of race should be spoken on by people of color because it wasn't a white person's place to speak on them. Maury corrected that and said, you can't outsource this. This is just as much a problem, probably more so for white people than it is for people of color. So then I asked him when I decided I was going to preach on issues of race for the first time. I said to him, can you give me some advice? What have you seen white pastors, what mistakes have you seen them make when they talk about race? And he thought about it for 2 minutes. It was a long time. And he said, Craig, I've never once heard a white pastor speak on issues of race in the church.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, what? Wow. And he said that, and I remember hearing that, and I was just like, this cannot happen. And so it brought us back to this statement and, being able to speak on it and be able to bring these things along so that eventually we could speak on these things. And we wanted it so that the church knew that we weren't going to ever go the colorblind route. We weren't ever going to say that we don't see color. Instead, anti-racism requires you to see color, requires you to recognize there's differences and to embrace the beauty in those differences and to work very boldly against the inequalities because of racism, and that can only happen if you name this work, this sacred work, I would say, as anti-racism.
Okay.
Could you guys help us? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No.
My bad.
I want to know what you were gonna say because my question, it encompasses, dude. You guys don't understand. I got so many questions because this statement is so beefy. It's so good. Like we could take a good 20 minutes on each section in there. And we're gonna come back to just remind me that term sacred work and we'll get back to my question. So but go ahead, Icky.
Mine's is just a real quick one. I was gonna ask Mandy. Mandy, what are a couple things that would help someone recognize someone else who is non-racist as opposed to anti-racist?
So let me just clarify the question.
I'm kind of looking for, like someone listening along who's like, oh, I've never heard those two terms. What does it mean? And like, how do I recognize that in my tangible world?
I think so the difference between a non-racist person or someone who says they're non-racist versus someone who says they're anti-racist, that type of thing. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that I think the vast majority of white Christianity believes that they are non-racist. And I think it comes out in this colorblind language very specifically. We don't see race. We believe that everybody is okay. All lives matter, not just Black lives. It comes out in these really, really sneaky ways. Or I'm voting for Donald Trump because I agree with all of these things, even though I don't agree with his inability to take a stance against white supremacy, versus an anti-racist, which I think is very honest about their social standing and their flaws. I think, another one, I'm so sorry, I'm hopping. Another thing is, if you insist that you are not racist, pretty good clue that you are not anti-racist. I think maybe that's all you need. If you insist, I am not a racist. I think that's it. I would encompass it in that. If you insist, I am not racist, I would argue you're probably not an anti-racist. And that's because, and I had this conversation with Donovan over his Thursday chats. It's because if you are a white person, you have grown up in a society that has taught you either explicitly or implicitly that you are better and you are given more and you have more opportunities because of your skin color. Now, it's not told explicitly very often, which is why white people are so fragile and don't want to admit those things. But if there's a person who can say, because I am white, because I have privilege, because I come from a certain social location, I am racist because I have had these ideas bred in me. And because of that, I have to do the hard work of facing myself, of naming this weakness, of allowing people to call me out, and rather than get defensive, be like, I'm going to get quiet and process this and maybe ask some clarifying questions, but own it. And I think that's the biggest thing. If you're willing to say, because of my social standing, because of my social location, because of my race, I am tempted and I have racism bred into me. I think that's the sign of an anti-racist versus somebody who's like, no, I'm not a racist at all. I love everybody. Nah, you're probably not an anti-racist.
Yeah. Dude, that is that is a tough pill to swallow. And the way that I internalize that for me is when we take it back to the gender discussion and when you say, okay, by being a man, I am implicitly part of the problem in terms of oppression against women. It just is. And there's so much in you that's like, dude, I am not, that is absolutely not me at all. How dare you? You don't know me to say X, Y, and Z about me. So that is, and that's something that I want to challenge those who are putting forth the effort to say, look, when you put forth that point to someone to say, okay, because you are white, you are part of the issue. You are part of the problem just by being white. To not just do that and just sort of like throw it out there and then not journey with the person towards getting to a better understanding of that. Because I know on my side, if somebody were to just throw at me, you're a part of the problem just because you're a man, and then they just leave me with that and they leave, I'm gonna be like, get back, hey, get back over here. We are not gonna leave this there. Oh no, it takes a journey towards getting through that, and I believe that in that kind of work. One thing that I really love in the wording of these statements is that you're calling this anti-racism and prioritizing human rights issues a sacred work. I really love that that you're using that term, because I think that helps with part of the indictment and part of the challenge and part of the invitation for us as Christian people to say, hey, this is a sacred work. Mandy, if you could kind of start off on this question here. You guys talked about the importance of teaching children and young persons about the sacred work of anti-racism. What does that look like? And how I don't know if you guys have started already working on this, because I know, like Craig was saying, this is fresh and new, but what does that look like? What are you envisioning? How is Paradox embodying this or working towards embodying this concept?
Yes. Well, our first foray into the anti-racist work for kids happened this summer in our VBS series that we entitled Kid Ventures. And we had a day that was dedicated to race, which was really just learning how to recognize differences. They had this really cool activity where we got to name the color of our skin, and that was so much fun. Just everything from chocolate cake to a Starbucks mocha frappuccino to a latte. I was like, you're 5. Why do you know latte? But that's fine. It's, just really just learning to recognize and reading books. That week we had books very intentionally from the main characters were definitely not all white. I think we had maybe one each day, but most of them I really tried very hard to make children of color as the main characters of the books. And then after this anti-racism statement was read, we have now started an anti-racist series for our kids on Saturday mornings. So their Sabbath school is spent on this topic, which has been quite the adventure in trying to learn how to do this, and a lot of engaging with parents and seeing what are some of their fears. And so we're in this series right now where this week was going to be our 3rd week of I'm looking at my calendar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-week series on anti-racism. And it starts off, each day we're covering something different. We're very intentional with the fact that this is an introduction. So we're not trying to go into all of the nuances with kids, but just an introduction. And so our first week, we started by naming the sin of white supremacy with our kids. We didn't use that language quite specifically, but we talked about, let's describe Jesus and let's meet Jesus and what is he like and what are some of his characteristics and what do you think that means for Christians and how do you think Christians should ask? And, sometimes Christians mess up. Have you ever messed up? I know I have. Well, Christianity as a group has messed up really big. And have you guys heard of slavery before? And leaning into that conversation and talking about how Christianity was the big supporter of slavery.
Yes.
And so we began that conversation, and that was our launch pad for, okay, now that we've had this conversation, we are going to learn how to be better Christians, because while we weren't part of the Christians that did this, we are still part of the group that did it. And so we're going to be better. And so this last week, we learned how to recognize differences, and they have an activity that they're doing at home where they read book characters and talk about what are their physical similarities, what are their physical differences, what are their, hobbies that are similar. How do you imagine you would be friends with them? Just simple things like that. This week, one of the parents, bless his soul, has the hard task of actually teaching them what racism is. He's going to define it and teach them. And then we're intermixing it with Bible stories. So stories from the Bible, talking about racism in America's history, racism that's happening now, and how do we overcome that as a group. And each day, along with the lesson, all of the parents get an activity that they get to take home and do with their kids at home. We have a parents meeting that we get every 3 weeks to talk and debrief. How's it going? Here are some tips as you navigate these conversations, because these are tough conversations, and parents, we as a society are just starting to have these conversations. And so many parents don't know how to have these conversations with kids. And so being able to walk alongside them and support them every step of the way is a huge commitment. So that's kind of what we're doing with our kids. Our youth is a little bit different because our youth are made up of 90% young Black ladies, which is phenomenal. And so I'm not necessarily approaching it from an anti-racism kind of way. A lot more of it is exposure to people who are interested in the things that they're interested in, as well as people who look like them. So one of my classmates from high school who is Black came and shared his story about what it was like to grow up Black in this area, and what he terms as, I wish I could remember the term. It's like friendly racism. It's it's like racism. Yeah, it's like racism
we've all experienced.
Yes, exactly. That wasn't quite the language he used. He had another word, but that's the concept, and how he navigates that. And we're hoping now to begin bringing in more just Black professionals who are just killing the game, who are in fields that these girls are interested in. So that is a lot more about helping them see, because as much as I want to be the person that they need, I can't encompass all of that as a white pastor. And so recognizing that, I think, has been really important. That was a long answer, but there you go.
No, that's that. Hey, no, that's good, man. This is what I like this, because there are literally people that are looking for churches like this, and they might be in Redlands. So we're hoping that they will connect to you all, and if not, absolutely, that they'll be online and connect to you this way, because it seems like they'll be able to do that. I love how you incorporate the parents. Yes. Work and the kids, because this is what I remember. I don't know if you guys remember this about Sabbath school or Sunday school, or whatever the thing is that you went to, those listening. The parents go in there, they send their kids in and they leave, or they send their kids in, they have them sit in the front, and then they're all back in the back on their phones. And that's like how it goes, and unless the parents are involved, it's really hard to internalize and kind of make permanent these lessons that are happening, So yeah, that's amazing.
I'm a big believer that we should be teaching racism, and we need to be talking about white supremacy in school. That needs to be part of the curriculum. In every Christian school. I'm not talking about public school. Public school do what they want. That's federal stuff. But like in Christian schools, if you're going to be a Christian school, you need to teach this. I'm really happy to hear what you guys are doing. That's imperative, because you said that your friend talked about, and you coined it, friendly racism.
Yeah, he has benevolent racism is what he said.
Benevolent racism. This is something that let me tell you, Mandy, we people of color have experienced that. If you've ever gone to and I'm Adventist, so I grew up in an Adventist school. But if you ever gone to one of our academies, you're going to experience that. That's just part of the mainstream reality. And it could be as harmless and as kind as something like, you are so much better than your friends.
Yeah.
That statement right there, you're not like them. It's said in a kind way. It's supposed to be a compliment, but really what you're saying is the rest of your peoples are horrible.
Mercy.
And you're not like them. Two, I came out at, Tongans, we were tupenus or lava-lavas around us, and it's a sheet that you tie around us. And I came out of my dorm room once wearing that, and this a white guy. He was in my class, obviously from a very country folk family. Turned to me and he says, nice dress. And he literally said under his breath, he said, I didn't know if I should hug you or if I should have sex with you.
Mercy.
Oh gosh.
And I turned around and I said, what? And he was gone, because
he better been gone.
He was a burly guy, but he would have got a whooping on that day right there.
All the way from
Well deserved.
the island.
And it was just under his breath, and maybe, at that age we all, we're cracking jokes. So maybe he just thought it was funny. But these are things that we experience. And, what does it do to a young teenager who's expressing his cultural garb? Not want to wear it anymore. I'm not that kind of human being, but somebody else would have not want to wear it anymore. Right? And it makes us ashamed of our culture. So, we're constantly trying to move towards whatever social conditioning's happening to us in these spaces.
Yeah. Dang. Ooh, that's crazy, man. I remember. I won't say any names, but I remember I used
say
to.
The names,
nah, bro. Nah, I ain't gonna say any names. That's for Patreon later.
Patreon. You get everybody's name, their address, their social security number.
Yeah. No. But I remember two instances that pop up when you talk about that, and it's interesting because it happened in our Adventist academies, which is the Christian schools for Adventists. And so it's like this guy, I had a hoop earring, and I guess Michael Jordan was, that's what he knew about Michael Jordan. And so he was like, hey, you got that hoop earring there. That's like that Michael Jordan fellow. He's done a lot for the brotherhood, hasn't he? And he he gives you the head nod, like, hey, I'm in the know, I'm hip, I know what's up. I know about the brotherhood, I know about that.
I know the name of that individual. Can I buzz in?
No. And then the second one, which was, and this one I know was much less in the guy's it was more subconscious, I guess I would say, but it came out blaringly because this guy came. He was like the liaison for the military, and he comes up to my school. He's in our religion class, and he's like, "Hey, I don't know if you guys know, but if you were part of the military, you actually can get to quite a high-ranking position as a Christian." He says, "Has anyone ever heard of Barry Black?" Man, and it didn't help that his name is Barry Black. My school is full of the homies that are from the mountain regions, which are not black at all. They are mostly white, a few Hispanic, but mostly white. And so they've not heard of him. I was the only person in my class that heard of Barry Black. And so I said, yeah, I've heard of Barry Black. And he looks at me, and without missing a beat, he says, "Of course you have, because you're black."
No.
Now here's the doozy about it. That's exactly correct. That is the reason.
Right.
But
100% accurate.
The insensitivity to just so blatantly just say that like that is just like, you really have no concept of how that can come across to what I now think of you thinking of me, plus how you have now distinguished me from the rest of my classmates and friends here in this class. And it just happens like so smoothly, so willy-nilly, that it's just, it's this thing, and he thought, I'm doing a good thing here. I am denoting that you are black, and that's why you know this information. That's a good thing, and I knew about that.
Give me a dab.
Yeah, let's Dougie. I don't know.
Dougie.
let's Millie rock here. Yeah, so you're just like, oh God, all right, thank you, man. Let's get back to whatever we're talking about here. But yeah, man, listen.
This time has been so cathartic.
This is good. This is good, man.
Thank you for coming.
And I want to say this again. I don't know if I had said this on camera last time when we were recording, but we're doing this series, but we have to keep doing work that keeps these things in mind. This is not like we've done this for a segment of time and then we're done, and now we'll move on to the next thing. We've got to find ways to keep these conversations going. We need to get you guys as regulars on this podcast, and when new things happen, or when maybe we'll have some times where we just come on and just talk about a certain issue, be like, yeah, so and so said this, what do we think, guys? And we'll just go in, we'll just go in on it, and we'll just have some, man. What'd be cool, Icky, is if we could do, and I am definitely realizing that I'm inviting myself to Paradox, but I'm saying if we had, as we had one of like a live church service,
if we change our membership there, is that what's done?
Oh, hey, quiet, man. That's for Patreon. That's Patreon knowledge. Patreon. They're only ones in there. Yeah. No, but it would be cool if like one of these discussions like this was like a church service. And I'm not saying it has to be a Paradox, but I'm saying like to have something like that, and we could have it be our podcast episode, but it would also be like part of the church. Because I would love to get, just more voices in on this conversation, and especially since we've had these talks, man, I feel like there's just so much richness that comes from these conversations that we've had with you pastors of Paradox, and the feedback that I get, on Instagram and whatnot. It's been really, 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 really enriching. It's encouraging to hear these things. So we got to keep it going, man. This cannot be the end of these things. So, yeah.
Oh, that Christendom would be as courageous as you guys have been there in Paradox. Thank you for continuing to lead that trend, and for willing to follow the cause even when it's no longer a trend.
Right. Oof, right. Speak that. I would love to have a final thought from both of you on this, on the whole kind of three making a statement experience. What are your thoughts? What can you leave us with?
Mandy, go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't help with that part. Sorry.
We talked about this, Don. Come on.
Craig did not want to have to do this. He actually told us ahead of time, and I dropped the ball.
And he ended up having to do it.
Yeah,
you know what, Craig? I apologize.
Not
for
wanting to do
You do not need to apologize. This isn't a big deal.
From all of us here at the production.
Yeah, from all of us at production. We do not want Craig to look like he is, misogynistic. Nothing.
We're gonna send you a little care package after this, Craig. No, we're not.
Thanks.
We're not going.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to that.
It's not in the budget. That's for Patreon.
That's not. So we apologize.
All right. Sorry, guys. All right, Mandy, please. Yes.
I think my thought, what I would close on is to confront yourself and your community and your religion and your faith is such a difficult task. And it is one that requires bravery and vulnerability, because when you confront yourselves and when you face yourselves and you see yourself and your community, how you really are, it's a painful, it's a hard experience, and there will be lots of grief and there will be lots of mourning. And yet it's the only way to truly embody this radical love of God, to embody it as a person, to embody it as a community, is to do the work. And to do so is it's exactly what we've been saying this entire time. It's sacred, it's holy. And it is spirit work. You are walking hand in hand with God. You are embraced by the Spirit, and you have Jesus's love embodying you when you do this work. And so I offer that as encouragement to anyone who's afraid, who's feeling defensive, who's feeling like, I don't know if I have the mental capacity, the emotional capacity to do this. Because it gets better and it becomes something that's incredibly beautiful in the end. Mm-hmm. If you ever reach the end, which you probably won't, but that's fine.
Yes.
Correct. And just to add to Mandy, what she said, I think that we all, and I say we as Christians, really want to believe that the church is good. There's this deep desire to believe that participating in this church is a good thing, that the people in charge are good, that the people leading it are good, and that this church has always been a help to the planet and to humanity. It can be a bit jarring when you start to realize that that's not the story of the church and not the complete story. I have found some of my best moments to be in church, and I've seen some of the worst moments of my life to be in church. And I think that what's important is for us to be honest about when the church is good and to celebrate that and to accept it. And then to also be honest about when the church is not good and when the church misses its point, and when the church goes against what I would call the Christian gospel. That's going to happen, and it can be disappointing to discover at first, but it's okay, because what you can do going forward is you can begin to work against those things. And so whatever religious context you are in, whether it's inside of Christianity or outside of Christianity, whatever community you resonate with, I think it's worth looking back through your history and seeing where the church has been good and what's inspired you, and to continue to amplify and do those things going forward. And also to be honest about how the church has hurt other people, or your religious body has hurt other people, and to work against those things. And when you think about what the church's, our church's mission statement is, which is to see and embrace Jesus Christ in all, we really believe that, and that includes all of our history, both the really beautiful, inspiring parts and the ugly, sinful parts. And to be able to embrace that and to go forward and to work with that, I have found is what makes church life really vibrant, exciting, and rewarding. So may you be able to see those things in your religious body's history and work toward what is good while fighting against what is evil.
Amen.
Beautiful words.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
You guys are the best.
Thank you, girls.
Thank you so much for giving us 3 episodes to talk about this stuff. I've really enjoyed being able to look back at where these statements have come from. And what I've appreciated about both of you is just the thoughtful questions, the critical questions, the questions that make me say, let me think about that. Just really appreciate the engagement and the discussion. So thank you for these last 3 episodes.
Oh, yes. This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship online. And we already knew each other, but, going forward publicly for others, because we're going to educate this world. We're starting an army.
We're public with our friendship. I guess we're not embarrassed anymore of knowing each other.
That's it. That's the key.
That's the key. That's the glue. Awesome. Dude, well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
please listen, share, like, subscribe. Tell your buddies from the mountaintops or the valleys, wherever you're at, the gutters, the alleys, wherever. Let's play this in the homeless encampments. I'm sure they've got their own perspectives as well, and that will help and shape us. I mean, you never know what these things can do. And I know that somebody probably thought that was a joke, but I'm actually serious, because these conversations should happen everywhere. It takes all parts of life in order for us to make a better world. Let's get radical about it, people.
Preach.
Yes. All right. God bless urban prophets, paradox pastors. Oh, that's a cool term. Yeah. Out. Yeah.
Out.
Out.
Blessings, guys.
Yeah, man. This is good.